Entitlement. That is a word that has been thrown around loosely for years now, but it's seen a lot more use in recent times given the situation with the Epic Games Store exclusives. And it's a word that essentially, when it's used, is saying that somebody is being unreasonable because they're blinded by their own selfishness. Sometimes, you know what, sure, it can be the right word to use, it can be accurate, but quite often, it's not. Quite often, it's a word that's used to shut down debates, to lock people out, and when it's combined with other words like, say, toxic, it's creating a convenient boogeyman. Yet, what do you find when you look at the big picture? Well, I think you find that, well, yeah, fans can act in an entitled manner sometimes. So too can game developers. So too can the journalists who cover the industry professionally. And today that means that we have a lot of work to do. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another super fun deep dive episode. How's it got this bad lately? I mean, sure, the internet's always been dramatic enough, hasn't it? But as of late, it's been rough. Now, sure, it's a broader cultural issue, but there's no doubt that the Epic Store exclusivity, that has led to another wave in all of this stuff. First though, before we get into this, site changes have heavily decreased recommendations of content like what you're about to watch, and the platform seemingly is favoring subscriptions and ringing the bell, as shown by the new numbers that creators are being shown. So, if you would like to stay updated on gaming news, then hit subscribe and ring that bell. It seems like we're going to be on your recommended feed a little bit less moving forward. So, let's see if we can increase the percentage on that bar, and with that said, let's get into the video. So I'm covering today's topic from three perspectives. I think three perspectives that pretty much cover the main ones. Of course, I'm a games consumer. I'm also somebody who covers the industry professionally on this channel, and I'm also a developer. When developers talk about struggling to keep the lights on, well, I've been there. I funded my company with my own savings. I know how terrifying it is, like how terrifyingly fast money leaves your bank account when you're funding a 4 to 6 person team. I've made wrong decisions that have cost me a good bit of money. I get it. Game development is hard. Now, our studio's fine. We're coming through the other side. You'll see our work soon, but that is a story for another day. And I bring this up. I bring up my experience doing development stuff because I constantly see my fellow developers treat our audience with disdain. I see them display the exact same entitlement that they decry those who play games for. And what happens when traditional media steps in to cover this? Well, it's not particularly good. They often also act in an entitled and unreasonable manner. Less so for new media, although I do often see pundits either play dumb to please a crowd or just be plain bad at their job, not doing proper research. I mean, the lack of mentioning the China-like video game playtime restrictions suggested by the UK Parliament's Game Gambling Commission, that's a great example of really kind of irresponsible punditry. But the thing is that almost nobody is coming off from this modern situation looking quite good. But to start, we're going to look at those who cast the first stone. And recent events have given us a prime example here, the Ooblets situation. What's fascinating here is how close they were to giving an honest and respectful explanation of their situation, and then how much they ruined it by essentially lacing their post with bile. And what's great is that I've got an example of another developer doing the same thing, but doing it well. So the Ooblets developers made a post announcing their Epic Games Store exclusivity, and they started off by poking a bit of fun at Epic and all their Fortnite dances, and then they got into the real stuff. In the Why'd We Do This section, they pretty much say it perfectly. They say that Epic was a big decision that they didn't take lightly, but that the numbers made sense. They said that Epic doesn't have a great market share right now, so instead they offer a minimum sales guarantee. They say this minimum sales guarantee matched what they wanted to earn from the game across all stores. They talked about how this deal removed a lot of stress and uncertainty, as they now know they can make it to launch and will not have to worry about keeping the lights on, and that they're able to afford some extra help in making the game, something that will have a ramp-up time that will delay the game a little, but will result in it having more features and more content. And when I read it out like that, I think it sounds perfectly reasonable to most people, and sure, it might be a bit inconvenient and not ideal, but from their perspective, that does make a lot of sense. But you see, here's the problem. I've left out some things. You see, when they say gamers, they say gamers TM, you know, like a trademark. That's pretty othering. It's a bit nasty, don't you think? And sure, it could be a little bit of light-hearted, honest ribbing, but when you look further down their post, well, that does change. They're aware of the backlash, and they talk about some of the common criticisms. And you know what? Their core points are reasonable enough, but they say this: Feeling like you're owed the product of other people's work on your terms or else you'll steal it is the epitome of the word entitlement that people use to discuss immature, toxic gamers. They then go on to suggest that instead people are angry at climate change, human rights abuses, the new Twitter UI, and the last season of Game of Thrones. I mean, sure, jokingly, but their point being, hey, it's a game, so let's not get worked up about it. And when I looked at this post, I was just amazed. Because logically, they're reasonable about their points, why they went with Epic, but they managed to throw all of that out the window when they decided to lace their post with venomous, othering language. They talked about how great their community is, and then they say gamers TM. They conjure up the tired entitlement language, and they purposefully make those who disagree with them the other group. And this othering is the core of what I think is destroying video games discourse. Instead of having an open and honest discussion that's not preemptively aggressive, we're instead seeing people pretty much lob mud at each other, all while claiming the moral high ground. That's pretty much what's been done here, and I think it's remarkably hypocritical. We're seeing people decry toxicity while acting in a pretty toxic manner themselves. Why does this happen? Well, the entire point here is the othering language. It dehumanizes individuals who disagree into a broader group, it slaps some labels on them, and then that pretty much gives, in the eyes of the people who are slinging the mud, free rein to lash out. It's predicated on the disgust reflex, and while it would be easy to bring up some historical examples of this stuff not really working out too well on a cultural level, I think that might be a little bit much given what we're talking about here. Here's an example, though, of a developer being far more reasonable and making a very similar point. Industries of Titan signed on with Epic. They said it was a timed exclusive, but that they did not want to downplay the inconvenience of their decision. They went on to explain the logistics for their team and the scope of the game, and how Epic will help them realize their game, with their goal being to launch version 1 of their game on both Steam and Epic. They said that the game will be better because of the increased resources, because of the Epic deal, but they ended by saying that they know this is going to inconvenience some of their customers, and they understand if people are no longer interested in their game. And whether you agree or disagree with their decision, I think we can all agree that was a clear and respectful statement. They did not downplay people's concerns, nor did they pull the usual, sorry if this inconvenienced you. They knew fine well that for a group of the people reading their post, it was an inconvenience. And that's how to do it, and if memory serves, the developers of Satisfactory were similarly clear and respectful when they explained their situation. Indeed, I think that the developers of Ooblets unfortunately acted in a rather entitled and toxic manner. Many game developers seem to basically feel entitled to the ideal customer. Going by the Ooblets post, some developers watching this may think that I'm just another entitled customer or angry YouTuber, gamer bro, but that's not the case. I do get it. Like, we've had some assistance from a local government fund, but I've put a lot of my own money into keeping our studio alive through the harder times. I know what it's like to worry about keeping people in a job, knowing that you are their sole source of income. That is a lot of stress. Now, our successes on YouTube have meant that we've not really had to worry about keeping the lights on so much in recent times, but believe me, before YouTube was the size that it is now, we had some very, very close calls. And because of this, I actually entirely understand why a team in a different circumstance would sign with Epic. Some people may say it's because a developer has no faith in their game actually selling, so they're greedily grabbing all the money now from Epic. And I don't really think that's a particularly fair statement, because if you can't get the funding to finish your game will never exist. And I do think that one thing that gaming audiences maybe don't appreciate that much from a developing perspective, because they never see it, is the failure rate of games. There's actually a massive survivor bias in gaming. You only see the projects that succeed. And for every game that you see in Steam, there are far more in Steam that have just slipped under the radar with barely any views. Again, my experience talking to other developers in our local industry, I've seen real-world examples of this happening. Going around the business area of Gamescom, seeing other indies pitching myself, talking to publishers, I see that failure rate. Indeed, we have 2 dead game projects in our past. And when you get down to the logistics of it, the amount of time that one has to spend securing funding, that's often one of the things that gets in the way of actually making the game like the most. So for some teams, signing a deal with a platform does make a lot of sense. It's not them being greedy, often it's just them putting their employees and their families first, understanding that developing with a clear budget and a clear plan is a better path. Personally, I do think that Epic exclusivity should pretty much be your last resort if you can't get other things set in place. But clearly, for some developers, it can be a valuable solution and it can be the difference between a game existing or not. Ideally, this is the kind of place where gaming audiences could be a bit more empathetic and reasonable, but here's the big challenge here. When the developers are acting in a way like how the Ooblets developers did, it's kind of unreasonable to expect them to be. We live in the real world, and developers have to understand that as much as they might have good logic behind what they're saying, if they hurl stones, they're not going to make friends. And if you hurl stones at your audience, yes, the very people who you should be making your game for, people who, it's all about the customer, then it's not going to end very well, is it? Just look at how well CD Projekt Red have done by just being reasonable with their audience. And the cultural rift that perpetuates this, it really does extend past just developers and gamers. It seemingly has also extended to many of those who cover our industry, with many outlets being outright hostile, or at the very least, having a really condescending snark be built into their work. And as much as, I'd say that Kotaku can produce excellent journalism with, say, their recent BioWare pieces, they're also quite guilty of this. There's a lot of talking down to people. They then typically seem to act surprised when they receive backlash for the bad faith manner in which they sometimes behave. Again, the topic of entitlement comes up here. As much as they may decry gaming audiences for being entitled and toxic, well, they themselves often act in a toxic and entitled way, throwing stones when none need be thrown. Games media, you're not entitled to have what you say go unchallenged. You're not entitled to act in a condescending and toxic manner free from pushback. You have to be reasonable. And for the rest of us as consumers, well, I think, we're not entitled to developers doing exactly what we wish. I think if they diverge from our interests, well, I think that's when it's time to move on to greener, more productive pastures. We do need to think about our own behavior and ensure that we're not acting in a hypocritical manner here. And really, when I look at a lot of the developer snark that I see, and a lot of the snarky articles that I see, I think this is what's been forgotten. Regardless of whether somebody is a dev, a journalist, or a player of games, they are a person. We're all just people with different perspectives. This industry is at its best when we're treating each other with respect and dignity as people. It is possible for two people to be entirely correct in what they say, but just have opposing goals or opposing perspectives. In these cases, what are we to do? Are we to throw stones, throw muck at each other? No. Are we to say gamers TM? That's not helpful. Tim Sweeney, maybe you don't tweet that. Jason Schreier, maybe you don't tweet that. Or maybe you reword it to be a bit more diplomatic. So to conclude, being reasonable is what's important. Be it developer, journalist, YouTuber, game consumer, I'm sure we're all guilty of not being reasonable from time to time. And when I think we look around us, it's pretty clear that this is all playing into a really big, bad feedback loop that is just making games discourse worse. I look at some of these dev posts and articles and it's just depressing. It doesn't need to be that way. So let's not immediately assume that developers are acting out of sheer greed, but equally, let's not lace our articles with venom. Let's not talk down to our audiences. Let's not be pointlessly nasty, which is what I think the Ooblets developers and recently just a lot of devs and press have been doing. And look, I don't think this will be a popular video. I've criticized just about everybody here, but do be clear, as a developer, as somebody who covers the news, and as a consumer, I've been guilty of just about everything I've mentioned in this video. And this video is by no means perfect. My best hope is that you can advance these ideas past where I've taken them in this video. This has got to be an ongoing discussion. I would love to hear what you have to say. And just where do you think we're at with discourse and gaming? How do you think it can be better? I would love to know. So thank you very much for watching this video. There'll be a lot of content on this channel this week, so consider hitting that sub button or maybe ringing that bell. But with that, thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.